Hello again. In this blog, I'm going to talk about Alzheimer's and the diseases of aging. And in the last blog, we discussed the factors which contribute to Alzheimer's dementia. The number one, in my opinion, is inflammation. So I'm going to actually suss this out a little bit more and explain some of the details of the inflammatory process. And how I really arrived at this conclusion over time is, at first I started looking at inflammation in the brain and the mechanism that occurs when inflammation invades the brain to such an extent that it causes a severe problem and degradation of memory over time. Then I started to look backwards and realized that there were many diseases that existed in the body even decades before Alzheimer's occurred. And I started to look more deeply into that. So I kind of joke that it's not as if one day somebody wakes up with Alzheimer's, like they get the flu, because those diseases of aging have actually been brewing often for decades before that ability and that problem manifests. And I remember that when we were doing our original research on Alzheimer's and dementia with CranioSacral Therapy that was published in the American Journal of Gerontological Nursing in 2008, the primary investigator, when I actually got permission to look at the history of many of our clients in the study, I noticed that almost all of them had diabetes. They had other diseases of aging that I'm going to speak about. And the researcher really wasn't surprised at all. She says, "Oh yeah, that's pretty well known." Well, it wasn't obvious to me. And so I started to look at, indeed, inflammatory processes and the diseases of aging. And so here's what we've found. The diseases of aging, which are inflammatory in nature, include the following things. Things like diabetes, cardiac problems. Some people in functional medicine actually believe that cardiac disease is an inflammatory or autoimmune response to the body. And the plaque is there to coat the arteries to try to actually help save them. This is a conclusion that Dr. Upledger, with his mentor, Stacey Howe, reached decades before people started to look at this more recently. And kind of like the idea that cholesterol was the bad guy, so to speak, was something that was really more of a campaign by other people to pin the problem on that. But actually, when you look at it, prior to cholesterol forming, you can often find inflammation in the arteries and veins. So we have diabetes, we have cardiac disease, osteoporosis, arthritis, and then again, closed-head injury. And part of the sequelae or consequence of closed-head injury, when you see swelling in the head, that's an inflammatory process. A number of car accidents, eye problems. I discussed in a prior blog, even cataract problems being reflective of formation of problems in the eye that can also lead to inflammation tangentially in the head itself, in the brain. Cancer, and many people feel that cancer, as a reflection of stress, has an inflammatory component, and autoimmune diseases in general. So when you look at all of this, in my book, Prevention of Alzheimer's in Just 10 Minutes a Day, I talk about the pyramid of inflammation. Because when you look at it in terms of the United States population, there's about 100 million people that are diabetic and pre-diabetic. Underneath that substrate is another 150 million that have some brewing autoimmune disease. And so when you look at that pyramid of aging, you have 100 million people, about 80 million that are pre-diabetic and about 25 million that are officially diabetic. Then on top of that, you have about 20 to 25 million people that are officially diagnosed with cardiac problems and heart disease. Then on top of that pyramid, at the very tip or apex, you have about 5 million people with Alzheimer's and dementia. And when you go down the pyramid, you actually also go down in age. So you start with people in their 70s or 80s, the 5 million people that are currently diagnosed with Alzheimer's dementia. But then you go down in age, and you go down to people in their 60s, 50s, and 40s, and you find that they're the ones that reflect cardiac disease and even diabetes and prediabetes. So it's as if you have a whole population of people 100 million plus, that are hurtling towards this apex. And a certain percentage of those, thank God not everyone, but a certain percentage of those people over time will end up with memory problems and dementia and Alzheimer's. And that's the basis of saying that Alzheimer's dementia, this 5 million, this number will triple in the next 10 to 15 years, because we have a base of the population that's hurtling towards this apex of Alzheimer's dementia. So I hope that makes sense. You just look at the numbers and see something is happening. Those numbers may be very conservative and very, very low, considering that within the food chain of what people consume and other problems, there are other factors that may be actually contributing even more to the onset of even earlier Alzheimer's dementia, which we're seeing the signs of right now. So all these are pieces to look at the diseases of aging and understanding if we can identify those diseases of aging even earlier on and treat people accordingly and start to dismantle the substrate to those autoimmune and inflammatory diseases, we may be able to actually avoid some of the other problems which ultimately result in Alzheimer's dementia. So that's just a perspective on looking at the whole picture. So this is not rocket science, but it does bear a certain amount of just clear-eyed perspective of looking at the whole national healthcare system and a brewing, really, national healthcare crisis if nothing is done. So I wanted to also put that piece in the puzzle for all of you to understand that Alzheimer's dementia is not just isolated, but it's connected to the physiology in the body and inflammation, which over time, at least in some people, result in memory problems. So you could have 100 million people that have that are diabetic and pre-diabetic, and then you can have 25 million or so that have metabolic syndrome, and I'll talk about that in another blog. A certain percentage of those will end up, maybe at least even 10% or 20% of those people with metabolic syndrome, which is about 75 million people. 5 to 7 million people of that number may end up with Alzheimer's dementia. So it's something to look at the prerequisites and the precedents which are really causing this problem. So something more to think about, to look at least knowing, having the knowledge of knowing how these diseases of aging actually end up causing memory problems. So thanks for listening again, and we'll see you in further blogs to talk even more about these and other subjects. Thank you.